Welcome to Echoes of War, where history is not just told, it is felt. June 1942. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. A vast expanse of water, calm and almost peaceful under the morning sun. But beneath that calm, something was moving. Something powerful. Something that would soon erupt into one of the most decisive battles in modern history. Just 6 months earlier, the world had changed forever. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had shattered the illusion of security in the Pacific. Battleships burned. Sailors were lost. And the United States had been forced into a war it could no longer avoid. In the months that followed, the Japanese Empire moved with speed and precision. Across the Pacific, their forces advanced. Island after island fell under their control. Strategic positions were captured. Supply lines were secured. And their navy, built around powerful aircraft carriers, dominated the ocean. To many observers at the time, Japan seemed unstoppable. Its victories had come quickly, decisively, and with terrifying efficiency. But in war, momentum can be deceptive, because while Japan was advancing across the Pacific, the United States was learning, adapting, recovering. Factories began producing ships, aircraft, and weapons at an incredible pace. New strategies were being developed. And perhaps most importantly, American intelligence officers were working in silence, listening, intercepting, decoding. Deep within secure rooms, far from the battlefield, cryptanalysts studied intercepted Japanese communications. Lines of code, fragments of messages, pieces of a larger puzzle. Slowly, patiently, they began to uncover something critical. A pattern, a plan, a target. The Japanese were preparing a major operation, one designed to deliver a final crushing blow to the United States Navy. Their objective was not just another victory. It was annihilation. They wanted to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap and destroy them completely. That target was a small, isolated outpost in the Pacific, Midway. At first glance, Midway seemed insignificant. A tiny island surrounded by endless ocean. But strategically, it was vital. It served as a forward base for American operations, a defensive barrier protecting Hawaii, and a critical point in the Pacific theater. If Japan captured Midway, it could extend its defensive perimeter, push the United States further back, and potentially force a negotiated peace. The plan was precise. Attack Midway. Force the Americans to respond. Then destroy their fleet in open battle. But there was one problem the Americans already knew. Through careful code-breaking and intelligence work, they had identified Midway as the target. They knew an attack was coming. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, they had the opportunity to prepare, not just to defend, but to counterattack. Hidden across the vast Pacific Ocean, American forces moved into position. 3 aircraft carriers, the core of what remained of U.S. naval power in the region. The USS Enterprise, CV-6, the USS Yorktown, CV-5, and the USS Hornet, CV-8. They were outnumbered. The Japanese fleet was larger, more experienced, and confident after months of victory. But the Americans had something different. They had timing, they had positioning, and they had surprise. Repairs on damaged ships were rushed. Pilots were briefed. Crews prepared for a battle that could determine the future of the Pacific. Across the ocean, the Japanese fleet advanced toward Midway, unaware that their plan had been uncovered, unaware that they were sailing directly into a trap of their own. 2 forces, moving toward the same point in the vast ocean, separated by distance, but connected by fate. Because soon, the silence of the Pacific would be broken. And when it was, the outcome would reshape the war. Forever Dawn arrived slowly over the Pacific Ocean on June 4, 1942. A pale light stretched across the horizon. The sea was calm, almost silent, but that silence would not last. Far from Midway Island, the Japanese carrier fleet was already in position. Powerful, organized, confident. 4 aircraft carriers formed the striking core of the force. Veterans of previous victories. Ships that had helped deliver the devastating blow at attack on Pearl Harbor. Their crews were experienced, their pilots highly trained. They believed this would be another decisive victory. On the decks of these carriers, activity began before sunrise. Aircraft were prepared for launch. Fuel lines connected. Bombs loaded. Engines checked and rechecked. Pilots climbed into their cockpits. Some focused, some calm, some carrying the quiet tension of men who understood the risks of what lay ahead. Then, one by one, engines roared to life. Propellers spun violently in the early morning air. And soon, the first wave of Japanese aircraft lifted off the decks, climbing into the sky, forming into tight formations above the fleet. Their mission was clear: strike Midway, destroy its defenses, and prepare the island for occupation. As the aircraft moved toward their target, the fleet below maintained radio silence. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But far away, Midway was already preparing. Radar operators detected incoming aircraft. Warnings spread across the base. Pilots rushed to their planes. Anti-aircraft crews moved into position. Engines roared to life on the island. Within minutes, American fighters were climbing into the sky to intercept. Then, the attack began. Japanese bombers descended over Midway. Explosions erupted across the island. Runways were hit. Fuel storage ignited. Buildings collapsed under the force of the bombardment. Smoke rose into the sky, visible for miles. The sound of war echoed across the small island. But Midway did not fall. American anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly. Shells burst in the sky among the attacking planes. Fighters engaged the incoming bombers. The air filled with chaos. Planes diving, turning, firing, falling. Some Japanese aircraft were shot down. Others pressed forward through the defensive fire. The attack caused damage, significant damage. But it was not enough. The island was still operational, and that created a critical moment of uncertainty for the Japanese command. Back on the carriers, reports began to arrive. Midway had been hit, but not destroyed. A second strike would be needed. But at the same time, there was another concern. What if American carriers were nearby? What if they appeared while Japanese aircraft were rearming for a second attack on the island? That hesitation, those few moments of indecision, would become one of the most important turning points of the battle. Orders were given, then changed. Aircraft that had returned from the first strike were prepared again. Some were rearmed with bombs for another attack on Midway. Others were prepared with torpedoes in case enemy ships appeared. On the crowded flight decks, confusion grew. Fuel hoses stretched across the surface. Bombs and torpedoes were moved into position. Aircraft were being refueled, rearmed, repositioned. The decks were filled with activity and vulnerability. Meanwhile, far beyond the horizon, American carriers had already launched their response. Waves of aircraft lifted into the sky. Pilots flew into the unknown. They did not have exact coordinates. They did not know precisely where the Japanese fleet was, only that it was out there, somewhere across the vast ocean. The search began. Hours passed. Fuel levels dropped. Tension increased. Then, the first American attack groups found the enemy. Torpedo bombers descended low over the water. flying directly toward the Japanese fleet. Slow, exposed, and incredibly vulnerable, Japanese fighters quickly moved to intercept. What followed was devastating. One by one, the American torpedo planes were shot down. They pressed forward anyway. Pilots continued their attack runs under intense fire. Many knew they would not survive. But they continued. Because they had a mission. Because they believed their sacrifice might open a window. And they were right. Because while Japanese fighters were pulled down to low altitude, focused on destroying the torpedo planes, something else was happening above them. High in the sky, unseen, American dive bombers were approaching. And in just a few moments, everything would change. High above the Pacific battlefield, far beyond the chaos unfolding below, American aircraft were still searching. Fuel was running low. Pilots scanned the endless ocean. Nothing, just water, waves, silence. Some squadrons had already turned back. Others were moments away from doing the same. Then, everything changed. A small detail. A single clue. One American pilot noticed something unusual. A lone Japanese destroyer speeding across the water. It was out of position, moving fast, as if it were trying to rejoin the main fleet. The pilot made a decision. Follow it. The formation adjusted course. Engines strained as they pushed forward. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, they saw them. Below. The Japanese fleet. 4 aircraft carriers. Surrounded by escort ships. Cutting through the Pacific. Completely unaware of what was about to happen. It was the moment they had been searching for. And it was almost too perfect. On the decks of the Japanese carriers, activity was still underway. Aircraft were being refueled. Bombs and torpedoes were scattered across the decks. Fuel lines stretched between planes. Crews rushed to prepare for the next strike. The carriers were at their most vulnerable, and they didn't know it. Above them, American dive bombers began their attack. Pilots rolled their aircraft into steep dives, noses pointing straight toward the ships below, engines screaming as gravity pulled them downward. The ocean rushed up to meet them. Wind tore across their wings. Inside the cockpits, there was no turning back. Only the target. Only the mission. Only the moment. Japanese lookouts spotted them too late. Alarms sounded across the fleet. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Shells burst in the sky. But the timing was catastrophic. Most Japanese fighter planes were still at low altitude, engaged with the American torpedo bombers that had attacked moments earlier. The sky above the carriers was suddenly exposed, unprotected. And the American dive bombers were already descending. The first bombs fell, then the second, then the third. Explosions ripped through the flight decks. Flames erupted instantly. Fuel ignited. Ammunition detonated. The carrier Akagi was struck. Fire spread rapidly across its deck. The Kaga was hit multiple times. Explosions tore through its structure. The Soryu was engulfed in flames. Smoke rose high into the sky. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers were burning. Chaos consumed the fleet. Crews rushed to contain the fires. Damage control teams fought desperately to save their ships. But the situation was already beyond control. The combination of fuel, bombs, and confined deck space created unstoppable infernos. The carriers had become floating firestorms. But the battle was not over. One carrier remained, the Hiryu. Its aircraft were still operational, and its commanders acted quickly. A counterattack was launched. Japanese planes found the American fleet. They struck the USS Yorktown CV-5. Bombs hit the deck. Explosions rocked the ship. Fires broke out. Damage spread. The Yorktown was left heavily damaged, drifting in the ocean. For a moment, it seemed the battle might still turn, but the Americans were not finished. Later that same day, American aircraft found the Hiryu, the last remaining Japanese carrier. They attacked with precision. Bombs struck the ship. Fires erupted. And soon, Hiryu 2 was burning. 4 carriers destroyed. In less than a single day, the core of Japan's naval air power gone. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted, not slowly, not gradually, but in a matter of minutes. Moments that would echo through the rest of the war. Moments that proved how quickly history can change. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, the battle was over. But what remained was something far greater than destruction. It was a shift. A moment where the course of history changed direction. The Battle of Midway had lasted only a few days, but its impact would be felt for years. Across the ocean, the wreckage told the story. Burning carriers, scattered debris, oil spreading across the surface of the water, smoke rising into the fading light. For Japan, the loss was devastating. 4 aircraft carriers destroyed. The Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, and the Hiryu. These were not just ships. They were the core of Japan's naval power, the very force that had carried them to victory after victory across the Pacific. But perhaps even more important than the ships were the men, highly trained pilots, experienced crews, years of skill and discipline, lost in a single battle, losses that could not be quickly replaced. From this moment forward, Japan would never again hold the same level of dominance in the Pacific. The momentum was gone, the initiative lost, and for the first time since the war began, they were no longer advancing. They were reacting, defending, holding on. For the United States, Midway meant something entirely different. It was more than a victory. It was proof. Proof that recovery was possible. Proof that intelligence, preparation, and timing could overcome even the most powerful enemy. Just months after the shock of attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States had struck back and changed the balance of the war. The Pacific was still vast, the conflict far from over. Many more battles would follow. More lives would be lost. More sacrifices made. But after Midway, the direction had changed. Because sometimes, history does not turn slowly. Sometimes it shifts in an instant, in a decision, in a moment, in 5 minutes that define everything that comes after. And even now, decades later, the echoes of that battle still remain, carried across the ocean, remembered in history. A reminder of how fragile power can be and how quickly it can disappear. If this story made you feel the weight of that moment, if you want to continue exploring the battles that shaped our world, take a moment now. Like this video, share it with others who are passionate about history, and follow Echoes of War. Because history is not just something we read, it is something we remember.